In From Zere with Love this week, a new documentary, A Good Hope, explores how a new generation is building a future for a deeply divided nation, marking South Africa's Youth Day on the 16th of June. This comes at a time when the world grapples with issues of racial inequality and injustice. Film director Anthony Fabian and founder of Generation Schools, Jevron Epstein, continue the conversation by exploring some of the challenges faced by young South Africans and how protagonists in the film are working to overcome them. Gentlemen, very good morning and thank you so much for joining me on Weekend Dawn. Anthony, I'd like to start with you. Where did the idea come from that you'd like to put together a movie that tackles social ills in South Africa?
I suppose you could say it began with a film that I made 10 years ago called Skin, and that was a journey that began 20 years ago. So I have been, although I'm British, I have been coming to South Africa and making films there for 20 years. And what the starting point was that I felt that there was a big disconnect between the way people talk about the country and what I felt when I was in the country. In other words, there was generally a very doom and gloom feeling about where South Africa was going. But when I talked to, in particular, the younger generation, I felt incredibly inspired. And I thought, if these are the people who are going to be taking the country forward, then I see a much brighter future than the one that's being described.
All right, Jevron, let's bring you in here. The connection with Generation Schools. You're the founder of Generation Schools. What's Generation Schools all about?
Generation Schools, unlike any other school in South Africa, is a school that's got multi-age group students in the classroom. So obviously looking at generational educational inequalities by assisting various children at their various pace. And we've got a multi-curricular approach. So we don't just have one curriculum, meaning that children are able to move between their strengths, understand their weaknesses, and graduate in a position to move forward versus sort of to grade that student on a global basis. So quite unique, and obviously for myself personally, I believe that the only way South Africa becomes the South Africa it can be is through providing education, education that's relevant.
All right. Anthony, back to you now. I want to talk about the cast and crew. What was the task like of selecting a cast and crew, and what was that process like? Specifically considering that, you know, there's quite an array of actors who are South African based. How did you go about picking them?
Well, bear in mind this is a documentary, so we didn't have actors to choose, but we did need to find who would be the most inspiring South Africans who would be in agreement with this idea that there is hope for the country. And our starting point was looking at different areas, whether it was education like Jevron or unemployment, job creation, the medical profession. So we looked at a number of different areas. In the end, we broke it down to 8. And our greatest talent pool was really from the 200 South Africans to Watch, which is a series that The Guardian has been doing for many, many years. So we looked at those 200 South Africans to Watch, young South Africans, and we whittled it down from there. We interviewed people. This is a process that began 4 years ago, and the film is now finally launching next week.
Wow, took 4 years to put together. Jevron, my question to you is about the quality of education in South Africa, as opposed to other countries. Do you think we're on par with other countries when it comes to education in South Africa? And if we aren't, where do you think we could fix it up?
That's a very, very good question. It's a million-dollar question. I think, if you look at Scandinavian countries where there are 5 million people and everybody speaks one language, it's easy to get education right. Here we've got 11, now 12 national languages. We've had sort of immense inequality amongst different human beings, different educational gaps, and now we're trying to fix it all at once with one solution. So, the long-term effect that it has to sort of be unraveled and segmented to be done correctly, per each human being. But I think the fact that people like myself are able to do so, and we've got the freedom to explore with regards to educational offerings, I think we are on the right track.
Anthony, what do you think South Africans will be taking from this documentary after seeing it?
Well, I hope they'll take a great deal, because what we're hoping is to create a number of education programs around the film, both in schools and universities. And my hope is that this is a film that will effectively create many more films, many more good hope stories that are told by local people. What we hope to do is to instill a greater sense of hope and possibility in people, and to show not only the problems that are happening, but also the solutions. Because I believe it's a mindset shift that needs to occur to make people feel that the country does have extraordinary potential. And focusing on the positive rather than the negative is part of that process.
Jevron, I just wanted to ask about the challenges that the youth are facing, specifically when they are in schools, etc. Do you think in terms of teaching them how to be better men, for instance, when we're facing issues like GBV, do you think those things need to come into play when they're being taught at schools?
100%. I think if we look at the CAPS curriculum and we look at sort of how we assess children, it's always assessed by paper. It's not, it's not assessing the human being. So I think if we focus more on the humanities and on the cultural studies, specifically in school, and we change the narrative of education to being one more that is African, and unpack those topics as well as those subjects in school, we could radically change education. And I think that's my goal. I sit with one foot in a profit-driven entity being the schools, and the other foot in an institute called Cornerstone, which is a tertiary institution provider that was born out of the Cape Flats. It's 50 years old this year, and it started off to teaching black theologians that there was no difference between white and black theologians. So I think that we're in like a very interesting space. It's almost like a boiling pot, and I think lots of great things are going to come not only from this documentary, but starting to highlight terminologies that we haven't done so in the past, a specific terminology like privilege, unpacking that in the schools, unpacking gender-based violence, and segregation. I think these conversations are very important to be had and should be had in school more frequently.
Anthony, a similar question being posed to you here. In terms of youth development, where can our youth develop themselves here in South Africa? I mean, you've been involved with a lot of films behind the scenes here in South Africa, and you've got a special love for South Africa, obviously. And when you look and interact with the youth here in South Africa, where can they fix the issues?
One of the lessons that I've learned from making this film is that you mustn't necessarily rely on government to solve all your problems. And so there are extraordinary numbers of NGOs and civil society organizations that are doing fantastic work to improve the lives of people in South Africa, and particularly young people in South Africa. So I'm thinking about some of our contributors in Good Hope, the DGMT, DG Murray Trust, which looks at children from their early childhood development all the way to when they're getting their first job, and supports and helps them to do that. We have another contributor called Unati September, who goes into some of the poorest schools in the Eastern Cape and also in the Gauteng region, and ensures that they're going to the better schools, not just the village schools, that they are getting tutoring that enables them to matriculate. Because I think, as Jevron would doubtless agree, everything begins and ends with education. If you can improve your education system, then all other systems and all other structures within the country will improve. And, I'm very proud, for example, listening to Jevron. He's a great example of a Good Hope ethos, if you like, of offering the solutions to the problems, not just talking about the challenges.
All right, Jevron, your parting question that I'd like to leave with you, or looking for an answer, specifically, it's going towards the teachers here. I mean, we've been dealing with things like gender-based violence and racism, etc. How do teachers play a role in educating learners about non-racialism and non-discrimination when it comes to things like gender? Because a lot of the times you read stories about people who were in school and were getting a lot of flack from their teachers. So how do you change the mindset of the teacher?
Yeah. I think it's private schools can change pockets of society, but I think if you're looking at changing the fabric of society, you need to focus on teacher training. So I think if someone sort of systematically broke down what a teaching qualification constitutes, you'd be quite shocked. There's no sort of deep understanding or sort of imprinting our history as well as where we want to go as a society onto our educators. So I think that, where South Africa lacks in professional development for educators, as well as the ability to sort of reconstruct a teaching qualification that's based around logic, numeracy and literacy, but then focusing on humanities. So I think, if we could just focus on teacher training and professional development of educators and, raise them up in society as one does with doctors, pilots, etc., engineers. If you look at some of the highest paid people in Scandinavian countries, once again, are educators. I just think, we as a country need to understand what is important. Because if we can start equipping our educators with the ability to address these terms and to address these topics, we have a society that's stronger. So that would be my thought.
All right, Jevron Epstein, thank you for that. Film director Anthony Fabian and founder of Generation Schools, Jevron Epstein, chatting to us about their latest offering entitled Good Hope, a film which explores the complexities of a post-democratic South Africa with a particular focus on the role of youth in creating a more inclusive and cohesive society. Check it out. It drops this week on the 16th of June.